Welcome to Wake Up Canada News. I'm Brad Wilder. Is the fantasy that 84% of global energy supplied by oil and gas can be replaced by so-called green energy really a good move for Canadians? Since the first UN-COP, that's Conference of the Parties meeting back in 1995, world oil demand has increased from 64 to 100 million barrels per day. But even as demand increased, the environmental social governance movement encouraged investors to unload their oil industry holdings. For oil companies faced with share valuations, bad press, and the perceived status as a sunset industry, that's an industry without a future, the rational course for oil company leaders was to pay out large dividends rather than reinvest in production growth. Even though demand grew, supply and production actually stagnated, with many Canadian refineries closing down pipelines as well to supply demand. Now, this is where we find ourselves right now. Meanwhile, back in Ottawa, if you only believe fantasies, well, Prime Minister of Canada Justin Trudeau, graced with one of the world's largest reserves of oil, has presided over a 7-year-long anti-oil industry campaign, reducing multiple proposed export pipelines that could have been supplying those captive market countries. Sharing his anti-oil rhetoric seems to be a necessary qualification for Justin Trudeau's cabinet as well. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney recently went to Washington, D.C. to present the Senate Energies Committee with, plans to increase Canadians' oil exports, thereby freeing up more U.S. oil to help Europe reduce Russian oil purchases. Now, the idea was received with warm reception, of course. Unfortunately now, though, Federal Reserve Minister Jonathan Wilkinson promptly contradicted Kenney's message, telling the same committee that shifting to renewables and hydrogen will provide true energy and national security to Europe. In other words, don't count on Canada to help. It's incomprehensible that during a global oil and gas shortage brought on by the controlled destruction of our civilized society, Trudeau and the Liberal Party, of course backed by the NDP, tell Canadians all will be okay if only Canada rids itself of fossil fuel vehicles. Rich subsidies given out to private companies for wind turbines and other green initiatives that without these handouts could never compete in real market. A so-called green agenda to be accomplished at all costs, a destroyed economy, no regards to the harms caused to businesses and the people dependent upon the oil industry. Harms suffered by the average Canadian that already can't afford homes, food, and other necessities. The high price of fuel will cause many Canadians that are just hanging on from paycheck to paycheck real pain and real poverty. The high cost of fuel will not only affect the wealthy flying high in their private personal jets, the real pain will be felt by us peons living in the real world. How do we switch millions of Canadians to electrical cars with no infrastructure in place? Well, the simple answer is the plan for us not to own cars. Perhaps they wanted to corral us into large cities as part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution too. Won't need a car then, will you? Remember the slogan, you'll own nothing and be happy? Deep in delusion, he considers this to be a perfect time to announce a plan to have 60% of new cars and light-duty trucks be zero emission by 2030. Easily accomplished if no one owns a car, isn't it? Well, when you live in a constant state of lies and fantasy, facts don't matter. But here are the facts that do matter. Canadians forced to face the real-world impact. Okay, let's do some math. I know, I don't like math either, but we gotta. High cost of everything. The federal budget promises a $5,000 per vehicle rebate. How much is that electric car again? Yeah, $5,000 is nothing. There are 24 million gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles in Canada. Subsidizing replacement of just 1 million would cost $5 billion. Yeah, $5 billion. The budget also contains $900 million for new charging stations. That's helpful in urban centers, but providing a charging station network necessary to allow e-vehicles to travel into urban highways would cost, tens of billions more. Revenue needs, the federal government's longer-term plan is to get rid of all fossil fuel vehicles. Federal and provincial fuel taxes now total a stunning $22 billion every year. Now, these revenues fund the cost of building and maintaining urban streets and highways. How long can it be before governments are forced to regain those revenues from electric vehicle charging levies? How about grid stress? The average Canadian motorist drives 15,000 kilometers a year, and the average electric passenger vehicle uses 19 kilowatts per 100 kilometers. That works out to 2,850 kilowatts per year, more than 25% of current Canadian household consumption. That's a big number. Many of the country's electrical generation and distribution grids are already near capacity. Electric vehicle advocates say the problem will be mitigated by mandating low amperage during off-peak or late-night hours. But most highway drivers travel during the day when the grid is near capacity, and they will need high-amperage DC quick chargers during these already supply-tight hours. How about the land demand? Refueling with gasoline or diesel takes around 5 minutes, but even rapid chargers need 30 minutes. That means 6 times more land occupied by charging stations. How much of that land will be taken from agricultural production? There's more emissions, not fewer. Guaranteed. Canada's 24 million fossil fuel cars and pickup trucks emit 14% of the country's 1.5% share of global emissions. If all 24 million were converted to battery power, global emissions would be reduced by just 0.2%. Emissions growth from China's coal-fired power plants would offset that in just a few days. And that 0.2% doesn't count emissions produced from mining and transporting the materials that go into all those batteries, nor does it consider that 20% of Canada's electricity is generated with fossil fuels. Those factors clearly wipe out any benefit, unless we include the benefit that living a fantasy allows people like our leader included not to have to think about all those cold winters coming with no personal transportation. What can I say? The WEF plan is not the carbon footprint you leave behind, but rather the carbon footprint you are. Now think about this, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and comment on our channels in Rumble and BitChute. Ask yourself, are we all paying taxes to get rid of ourselves? Thanks for watching. This is Wake Up Canada News. I'm Brad Wilder.